What's up, runners, and welcome to my final foundational video for Marathon. This is the third video in this little short series where I'm trying to go over some basic ground rules before I start talking about Marathon proper. If you missed either of the first two, you can check the playlist down below. In today's video, we're going to be talking a bit about Bungie and why they've earned our interest in Marathon, as well as the original Marathon trilogy. So when we're talking about Bungie as a company, there's a bit of a long history to go through. I mean, they've been making games for over 30 years now, and everything they've put out has been consistently banger after banger, to some varying degree. Almost every one of their IPs that's come out since Pathways has been innovative in some way and created its own niche in the market. Pathways was definitely a little rough around the edges, but the mechanic of being able to talk to the dead and working through a sort of text adventure in the middle of your FPS with a timer for what you're doing isn't really something I've seen in any other games for the most part. Maybe the closest thing would be System Shock, but System Shock didn't really have the communication aspect. Definitely one of the more rough and hard to sell games that they've made, but there's no denying they were shooting for the stars. Even just the plot is really interesting. There's a really good story behind it. For anyone that's read the lore in Marathon, Pathways, Destiny, even a bit of Halo, it kind of feels like Bungie's been telling the same story over and over for the last 30 years with a different coat of paint. And I don't fault them for that. It's a pretty good story at the end of the day. And it's really interesting to go from game to game and kind of see the similar threads being pulled, but expanded on in their own way. The original Marathon trilogy was probably one of the most innovative games that Bungie's ever made, and that came out way back in 1994. And they did a lot to innovate the FPS genre that I don't think was expanded on until way later in the time of like Half-Life. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Marathon trilogy story towards the end of this video, so I don't want to dive too much into this, but just suffice it to say, Marathon definitely has its fan base, and it definitely was a banger. Now, Myth I've never played, but Myth looks really interesting. It's actually a real-time strategy game for anybody who hasn't seen Myth. And apparently it's a very unique take on the RTS genre. There's none of that, base building and buying units. It's kind of to just give you a set of units and tell you to go through the missions, which is apparently very novel. And it was really cool to look at. I watched a couple videos about it, as well as looked up some of the lore. And the plot, let's say, it's pretty standard fantasy plus Bungie's good versus evil story. So it comes out as a very unique RTS game that I wouldn't say is the most innovative of their games, but it definitely stands out, and I understand why it has its fan base. Unfortunately, I haven't looked up anything on Oni. I don't really know much about it. I've heard a lot of people talk about it and bring it up as some of their favorite Bungie games. I don't even know if there's more than one. I'm kind of just pulling it out of my head. But there's definitely a fan base for the Oni series, and people like it. And I haven't been able to look into it with the time frame that I'm trying to put these videos out. So I apologize to any Oni fans. But if you know what makes Oni great, sound off in the comments. Now, Halo. Halo is something I didn't play until Infinite. I never once had interest in Halo until Infinite was out. I didn't care about Bungie until I played Destiny 2. But the thing about Halo is, it pretty much created the console FPS multiplayer market. It really set the standard for shooting with your shoulder buttons and having these instance match-made lobbies. It really put Xbox on the map. And you could arguably say that every FPS that's come out since that's had multiplayer owes something to Halo. And that's not even talking about the plot of the game, or the story and the way it's told, which it's pretty well done. I've only played a bit of the first game, but anybody who has played Marathon and also played Halo can probably point out the hidden Marathon logos and not so hidden Marathon logos. But the similarities in the plot, it's almost a retelling of Marathon in a different context for a different generation. We technically have more character development for the villains, or maybe I should say aliens, with the Covenant and the Elites and the Flood being a thing. There's a lot of story that we get to see and experience. And of course, Bungie got to make Halo for a bit longer than they made Marathon's original trilogy, and Marathon was stuck on the Mac for a long time, so a lot of people didn't get to experience it. So it was kind of interesting to see the similarities in the general outline of the plot, while the nuances are definitely different. I'd say Halo was really Bungie swinging for the fences in both single player and multiplayer capacities. The multiplayer for Halo is pivotal to so many people's childhood or development stages, or just the best parts of their adulthood even. And personally, the style of Halo's multiplayer, it's not doing it for me these days. If I go and play Infinite or go back and play some of the older ones, it doesn't fit with how I like my shooters to feel. I definitely prefer, Call of Duty and Destiny's ADS mechanics and time to kill being a bit shorter and spawning in with my own gear. I'm not a huge fan of picking up items on the map, but a lot of people are, and if that's what you started playing, you probably like it a lot, and that's totally fine. But for a lot of people, that was what a shooter was, and even still is. Like, there's a reason Splitgate was popular for however long that was, 6 months. Now, Destiny, I feel like saying Destiny is a good game is controversial, to say the least. And I get it, Destiny is a very divisive game. Not everybody likes the RNG and the farming, and PvP is a bit of a mess and always has been and probably always will be. But if you parse out the mechanics and the parts that kind of make it a looter shooter, the gameplay and the mechanics of Destiny are fun. They're good mechanics. They're interesting. They draw you in. I don't think most people would say that Destiny is a bad shooter. If you had the gunplay of Destiny and the mechanics and the abilities and everything, and it came out and it had the exact same plot, but it was told in single player style like Halo, I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. I think people would kind of love that game. But for the kind of game that Bungie was trying to make, making it an MMO, probably the first, console MMO, and also making it a first-person shooter, while adding in raid mechanics and eventually dungeons and expansion content year to year, and Destiny was super ambitious. It is still super ambitious. And it's had its ups and downs, and it will continue to have its ups and downs, I'm sure. And a lot of people have said, Destiny is dead, Destiny is dying for 10 years. And I get that. It feels like it sometimes, but, we keep coming back to Destiny. It almost never drops low enough that I would even say that it's at risk of being a failure. There's always a sizable chunk of people who are enjoying it. There's, even at the worst times, there's still things that you can do. It's still fun to play with your friends. There's not much you can do to go get, a Last Wish experience somewhere else. And people have tried. The Division came out and that went away. Anthem died on arrival. Who knows how many other countless editions there would be of games that have done that. The closest thing that competes with Destiny right now is Borderlands, and that's a different beast entirely. I think they're totally different games. So, for anyone who doesn't like Destiny, I understand. But I'm sure most of you would agree that the reason that, you don't like it or that it has problems sometimes isn't the base mechanics of the gunplay and the level design and the art. It's the story's bad sometimes, and grinding out loot is kind of boring, and chasing your god rolls, etc. is not for everybody. Going into PvP, being forced to play the same thing over and over, you get what I mean. So while you might or might not like any of these games, they all have that Bungie feel. At the end of the day, they are all quality games but they're not for everybody. They've all been novel experiences that have developed their own fan bases and maintained a lot of them over the years. And I really think that the new Marathon is going to have a similar trend where it's going to come out and it is going to be incredibly popular whenever it comes out, and then people will develop and play it a bit and they'll change their minds and stop playing. And if that's you, that's totally fine. It might even be me. But the game itself, I am sure, will come out and have some really interesting mechanics and ways to play the game, because that's what Bungie does. They make interesting games. It'll be interesting, it'll be good. The question is it going to be for you, you know? The game's going to play fine. The game's going to have some good story behind it. The question is, are people going to like how it's delivered? Are people going to like the gameplay structure, the things you have to do around it? That's what it really comes down to, I think. One of the biggest things that I think a lot of people will absolutely give Bungie credit for, that if you haven't thought about it, you should consider it, because it does help make their games really stand out. And that's a lot of the background. In terms of the art style for their games, Bungie's used almost every art style that I can think of at this point, if you count Marathon's new, not Fortnite, almost cartoonish, but still very distinctly clear graphics. They've hit pretty much everything. But every time they make art for a game, everything really does tell its own story. You know? If you're looking at the Throne World in Destiny, or even Neomuna, which its plot sucked, but hey, it looks pretty awesome. You get a feel for what it might be like to live in one of these places, or get a sense that something's changing in the case of the Throne World. You can see that it's changing. And it looks so good. It's really cool to run around these places. In the original Marathon trilogy, some of the places that you go to are super distinct from anywhere else that you've seen in another game. The alien ship feels creepy and kind of gross, and in the later games, the places you go to are very obviously foreign alien planets, and I'm not going to say the names of these planets, but they look pretty good. And Halo, pretty much, if you talk to anybody who has seen Halo, they could probably pick a Halo game out of a lineup by looking at some textures. While some people will say that realism is important for graphics and art, I don't think it is. It really is the style that they're going for, and Bungie, while they sometimes will go for some realistic looking stuff, they really do lean more towards going for a graphic style that facilitates what they're trying to portray, and really exaggerating and making things stand out. It's not all about everything looking really nice. It's about everything looking right for the game. And if we're going to talk about music, I mean, everyone's heard the Halo 2 soundtrack. Everyone knows a ton of Halo songs. They're all super iconic. Destiny has some crazy bangers, and that's just these like last two games. The original Marathon has some really good soundtracks, and I don't understand why 2 and 3 didn't have soundtracks. I know they said they wanted to go for it for the style, but really, I mean, I love the first game soundtrack, and I wish there was more. The opening themes for those are really cool. But I think it just goes to show that Bungie makes really good music, and it's really noticeable when it's not there. Bungie's also really good with story, I think. You know, every one of their games has a really enticing plot line, and they're pretty good at keeping certain lore away from you and giving you certain bits and pieces and having you try and piece it together. And you're out here with a cork board trying to tie all the strings together and come up with some weird conclusion, only for Bungie to come out with a lore page, you know, the next year that completely discredits everything that you've done and everything was wrong. But guess what? Cade's back. And that's not to say that every story they've told is good. Just, you can just look at Lightfall and Curse of Osiris and Destiny, and there's some bad stories. And I don't know, I can't vouch for every game they've made in the past. Maybe some of them are less interesting. I think for the most part, though, they're pretty consistent in having a interesting story that makes you want to dive deeper and know more. And you kind of think about it and you kind of start putting things together. And I think that's a pretty good hallmark for a good story. If Bungie can hand you a page with some text on it that you can read in 30 seconds, and for the next 3 days you're trying to think about what it means, they got you. You're in it. Really quick before we move on. The next video I'm going to make is going to be my full-on speculation for Marathon, talking about what I want to see Bungie implement, how I currently see the game shaping out, and pretty much anything else I can squeeze in there while I rant. So if you want to see that or any other future Marathon content, go ahead and hit subscribe down below and let me know what else you want to see so I can start working those in and working on those. Almost everyone who has played Bungie's games has that one Bungie game that they keep going back to. Personally, some of my best memories of playing video games are probably playing Destiny. And I'm sure a lot of you have very fond memories of playing the older Halo games, playing Marathon. Maybe you played Myth, even Pathways. You probably remember playing the game. And if you remember playing the game, isn't that better than half the games that come out these days? So maybe you won't like the play style of an extraction shooter. Or maybe you don't like multiplayer. You wanted a single player Marathon. And I get that. I think it would have been really cool to have a new Marathon game that innovates even more on Doom after the new Dooms came out. That would be so cool. But that's not what they're doing. Maybe you wanted a Myth remaster, in which case, I'm sorry. But that's okay. You know, if you don't agree with what Bungie's doing with Marathon now and you try and you don't like it, that's totally fair. But I think Bungie's earned a chance to pitch us this game. I think they deserve to have us pay attention to what they put out about the game. You know, when they put out some new trailer or give us a new interview about the game, I think they've earned, you know, our trust that we can read that and take it at face value. Now, I'm not saying go pre-order Marathon as soon as the pre-orders go live without any other information. Obviously, this game can totally flop and Bungie could be a dead company and it's done. Is that likely? Is that what I think is going to happen? No, I think Bungie still knows how to make a new IP. The thing is, they haven't made a new IP in, what, 10 years? 12 years? No, it's 10 years. 2014 when Destiny came out. They haven't made a new IP in 10 years. They've been making the same game and innovating on the same game, on the same engine for 10 years. There has to be a ton of pent-up creativity in the Bungie staff. So I think they're really going to put their best foot forward in Marathon. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. But in the event that the upper management at Bungie is upper managing the way that they've been upper managing for the last couple years, maybe it's bad and it's a don't even pick up. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to see when it gets closer to release, what kind of things we see in terms of gameplay and what they want to show us. But I really want to see more. You don't have to like it. I just want you to be able to go in and listen to what they say. And if they say it and you don't like it, that's totally fine. But I think you should pay attention to it up until that point. Now, currently Bungie's in a bit of hot water. Namely, with all the layoffs happening last year and into this year with a lot of gaming companies, Bungie did lay off a large portion of its staff last year. Kind of out of the blue, and it sounds like it was pretty shitty how they did it. And I will definitely hold that against Bungie. Not as a game developer, but for their upper management. Because the devs did nothing wrong. The people who are making Marathon, making Destiny, making whatever Matter is, whatever other things they want to cook up, they did not lay those people off. That was management. And Bungie management, you know, they could be better. But the devs of the game are definitely people who I would not wish this game to fail for. If you want the game to flop for the upper management, you know, more power to you. But I want this game to do good for the devs, you know? We can talk about microtransactions as well. Microtransactions in Destiny are complicated. They have been there since 2015, at least, maybe 2014. It's been a while. I don't remember Destiny 1 launch very much. But microtransactions have been there for cosmetics, armor, cosmetics for your guns. The guns are not behind the microtransactions. There's microtransactions for ghost cosmetics and ships and sparrows and etc., etc. But I will say, I would rather microtransactions be for cosmetic purposes than gameplay purposes. Now, Bungie also has an expansion and seasonal model for Destiny. And you could argue that Destiny is pay to win. I mean, yeah, technically it is. You have to pay for the expansions, because originally when Destiny was coming out, it was based on yearly expansions. Like, WoW. I don't know how many people are going out there yelling that WoW is pay to win, but it probably is. And they've never stopped that model of putting out yearly expansions, and it's DLC that adds more stuff. Now, arguably, if you go into PvP, can you succeed with free-to-play PvP gear? Yeah, probably. I'm sure people have done it all the time, getting to the top ranking comp. But there's arguably the best stuff is, behind raids, which you have to buy. And if you want to play trials, you have to have the latest expansion, which is great because I don't want free-to-play cheaters and trials. But, that's just me. And I don't have a problem with paying for Destiny content and doing stuff that way, because Bungie puts out content regularly. The content has more story, which is actual missions. It has exotic missions. They put raids into the expansions. Dungeons are now paid, and they didn't used to be, but dungeons are in a gray zone for me. I just pay for the yearly thing, and I say give me all the stuff for the year, which for $100 I would say is a pretty good deal for how much gameplay I get out of Destiny. I'm getting a lot more out of my $100 in Destiny in a year than I am $120 in 2 new games this year. But that's just me. A lot of people, maybe it's not worth it to do that, and that's totally fine. But Bungie has a lot of monetization in Destiny, and I don't think Marathon can be monetized that much. There's no way you can have a serious PvP game with yearly paid expansions and paid seasonal battle passes that give out unique weapons that are better than the old weapons. You can't do that in a multiplayer PvP game. That's just how it is. Now, if they wanted to do cosmetics, and if they have a battle pass with cosmetics, I don't care. They can do that. I would 100% expect to see that, and if you don't want that to be in the game, I'm sorry. Microtransactions are going to be in Marathon. But hopefully, we're going to get free updates for maps, free updates with more weapons, free updates with more perks. That'd be cool. I'm totally fine with that. This is a similar setup to what Hunt does. They put out battle passes. It's like every 3 to 4 months right now, I want to say, and then there's like a month where there's none or something. It's weird. I don't pay attention to the timelines too much. I just always feel like there's an event going on when I load the game. And they do put new weapons in the battle pass. However, they are in the free version of the battle pass, so you have to level the battle pass, and then you will unlock the guns, and then if the battle pass goes away, they just go into your unlocks. It's just kind of like unlocking it early. You can do the battle pass, which I don't have a problem with. That's fine. I will allow that. That'll be more up to your personal preference if that happens. Hopefully they don't do that. I'm not a huge fan of that mechanic. Talking about Bungie and Destiny and where they stand right now. I think a lot of people who play Destiny and who have played it for a long time, and people from the outside who maybe don't play Destiny but see a lot of Destiny stuff in their feeds, a lot of people think that Destiny is stale, that Destiny is playing the same thing over and over, and every year they resell you the same content. Now, if we're going to say this, what do you say about everybody who's played every Halo game? Oh, you played the same game 5 times? I mean, there's so much you can do with your gameplay loop being shoot aliens. I think burnout's inevitable for Destiny. Like, I don't think I could play this game for 10 years, and that's totally fine, I think. If I come back, once a year to play the expansion, and that's it, I think that's fine. That's a totally fine way to play a game. If I stop playing, so what? If I had fun the whole time going through it, it shouldn't matter that much. Bungie has done a lot for trying to make raids more interesting, trying to make dungeons more interesting, trying to make the seasonal missions more interesting. I would argue that the last 2 seasons have been 2 of the most unique seasons in Destiny history. The actual mechanics behind the missions are as complicated as they've ever been. And the problem isn't, Bungie can't make a new way to play Destiny. It's that Destiny at its core is a shooting the gun at aliens game, and we've been shooting aliens. We've been shooting aliens forever. You can't make an entire new mechanic and game mode that isn't shoot the gun in your FPS. They might get away with putting SRL in the game and doing some other stuff. SRL is Sparrow Racing League, for anybody who doesn't know, which is a race mode they had for 3 weeks and then never brought back. But it's hard to not burn out on a game over 10 years when at its core it's a shooter, and you can add more tools to the play box, but it doesn't change the rest of the game. It's totally fair if you think Destiny is stale, but really Destiny 3 is not going to really solve that. You're going to be shooting aliens again. And Bungie can try and put out new stuff, but there's only so much they can really do with shooting the alien as your base mechanic. And I'm not saying, it's doom and gloom and Destiny's never going to do anything interesting. They can do something interesting. They can do limited time stuff or change it up, but Destiny's going to be Destiny. In 15 years, if Marathon comes out in 2 years and then it's 15 years from now, I think regardless of how good Marathon is, a lot of people aren't going to be playing it anymore. It's going to be old. You're going to have done everything. How many times can you load into a game and shoot people? I think PvP games will have a longer longevity on the shelf overall, just because every match is usually different in terms of who you're fighting and their abilities and what they're thinking, and you're playing against people. That's more interesting than shooting AI. Don't get me wrong. But once the meta's figured out and people are buying the same thing and all the ways to move around the map are settled, and you'll get some variety in somebody not knowing what they're doing and doing something weird, or doing something that actually just counters what you're doing, or playing anti-meta. It could be interesting. But do you really expect to play Marathon for 15 years? I don't think I want to play new Marathon for 15 years. I'll give it maybe 3 to 5, even longer if it's really good and they're really good at updating it. But you're going to burn out. That's normal. Anybody who says that Destiny's dead because people are burning out, fair enough, but it's been 10 years. I think people are going to show up for the end and call it a day, and that's totally valid. I think Bungie knows that too, why they're not pitching stuff for 2025 yet. They're going to let it ride. Let people calm down and go do something else. Bungie itself probably needs to get away from the burnout. Now, let's talk about the Marathon trilogy for a second. When we're talking about Marathon, I think we would make a mistake if we weren't going to talk about how Bungie absolutely changed the face of FPSs with this one game. We talk about Bungie being innovative, and the things that they make have changed the gaming landscape. And, Halo was massive with the multiplayer arena changes. Destiny was huge, making an MMO with a raid and its FPS, crazy. But Marathon was the first instance of vertical rocket jumping. I thought that was Quake. Did you think that was Quake? Doom apparently had horizontal rocket jumping, which, I'll give them that. But Marathon, you could shoot the ground with the rocket to gain air, and they used it for secrets. They knew it was in the game. The first vertical rocket jump was made by Bungie. Not to mention free mouse aim. Did you know that? Did you know that Bungie is the one that made it so that when you move your mouse up, you look up? Yeah. Marathon was the first to do that. You know what else Bungie did first in Marathon? Reloading your gun. Yeah, you didn't think about that, did you? Doom, you didn't reload. Marathon, you emptied a clip, you had to reload your clip. You ever played a shooter these days where you don't reload? Not very many. I know there's some. There's definitely some. But for the most part, if you're playing a shooter and you're playing PvP or maybe even just a regular game and you're shooting aliens, you're going to expect to reload your gun. It's pretty normal. Bungie created the reload animation. You know what else they made? Dual wielding. Yeah, dual wielding pistols in Marathon. First time you could dual wield weapons in a video game. That's pretty cool. I still like dual wielding things. They still won't let me dual wield Model 1887s in Destiny, but you know, maybe one day. I'm still holding out hope. The real thing that I think a lot of people will give Marathon credit for is adding a plot to an FPS. I mean like a plot. Like there's lore and there's story, and you don't get to find it unless you go looking for it. And if you don't read it, you don't know what's going on. But they'll tell you like a really detailed story, and man, is it a good story. Doom, you have your setup, you're hunting down aliens, and by hunting them down I mean exterminating them with extreme prejudice. But Marathon was like, let's have some moral questions in here. Let's question what it means to be an AI and to be human. And that's kind of crazy for an FPS in 1994 on the Mac exclusive. You couldn't play it on your PC, you had to go buy a Mac to play this game. A lot of shooters since then have had stories. I think anybody who has played an FPS in recent years that has a single player mode has experienced a story campaign of a shooter. Modern Warfare, Halo, Destiny, anything else. I don't know. Spec Ops: The Line probably got great inspiration from Marathon. They went full in on having a story in an FPS. But Marathon started that, and Marathon tells its story in a similar way to Dark Souls, which is kind of crazy to think about. But now, really quick for the plot of Marathon, I don't want to go fully into the entire series and give away all this stuff. I think it would really be in your best interest if you look it up or play it or experience it. You can play Marathon for free right now if you go to Aleph 1. So if you want to experience it, go ahead. If you just want to get the lore, I would really recommend. I personally watched Mandalore Gaming's videos on Marathon, and I liked those, and I think they were pretty good. I looked up some other stuff, some other things about Marathon. There's a lot of content on YouTube. There's entire websites about Marathon's lore. So you can go diving if you want. I think Mandalore's videos are a great starting point. But for the purposes of this video, I just want to go into a very loose plot summary of the first Marathon game. So, at base in Marathon 1, you are a security officer going on to the USS Marathon, which is a ship that is the hollowed out moon of Mars called Deimos. Now, you're showing up here because there's a bunch of aliens that showed up and started attacking the people on the ship and killing everybody, so they sent you to go fight them. Once you get there, you are being directed by a couple of artificial intelligences who are giving you objectives on your current map and then giving you usually a little map piece that shows your extract. Honestly, just thought about it. Did Marathon invent the extraction shooter? But in all seriousness, if you look at the map and look at the picture they give you, that'll be where you have to go interact with the terminal. That's how you finish the mission. Starting out, you're fighting aliens. It all makes sense. You're just fighting aliens and killing things and saving people. It's cool. It's great. But if you start digging around on computer terminals, you start seeing some weird stuff, and eventually you run into another AI named Durandal, who is rampant. Rampancy is sort of an AI becoming sentient of its own existence and then having a mental break from the fact that it's doing menial tasks instead of being a super intelligence as it is, and it causes problems sometimes. Now, Durandal will send you on some really weird quests and things that don't make sense, but you'll find out that, you're fighting the aliens and, there's an alien invasion of the planet down below, which is Tau Ceti, which is the setting for New Marathon. We are on the colony. And towards the end of the game, the conflict is resolved. Durandal and the security officer are gone from the orbit. They are somewhere else in space, and the game ends. This is really a chance for the story of Marathon to be expanded on. and share. I think it'd be great if this game came out and people got interested in the original Marathon and started playing it on Aleph 1. Maybe Bungie could even plug Aleph 1 so that people have the knowledge that they can go play the original trilogy and get some of that plot. Because there's a lot of things that happen in 2 and Infinity that I would love to tell you about, but I think it's better if you want to play those games that you go in and experience it, because the implications of that could change everything that I'm saying right now, and anybody that knows the story of those games knows what I mean. Just being able to get the base story in there and expand on it is something I think Marathon deserves. I think original Marathon trilogy should be more popular than it is. And I don't mean everyone should be playing it right now and the multiplayer servers should be full. I mean, like, people should look back at Marathon and the story and find it interesting, because it's an interesting story. People should be talking about the game more. And hopefully people will after new Marathon comes out and they get pushed into looking into it. Now, that being said, the last thing I want to touch on is single player. I've seen a lot of feelings that people want to see a single player aspect in this game, in new Marathon. And I get that, I really do. But Bungie really wants to focus on PvP. They've understandably been making Destiny for God knows how long. Don't expect a single player mode at launch. Now, does that mean there could never be a single player mode? No, there could be. But yeah, never say never. We might see single player in the far future. I would not expect it to be at launch or anytime shortly after. Now, all that being said, this was more of a ranty video than the last couple. I really didn't want to go all out on scripting stuff for this, so hopefully you kind of enjoyed more of my free flow thoughts and the weird long awkward pauses as I stare at the camera. And my camera's over here, but my face is over here, so I'm staring at my face sometimes while I talk, which is kind of unnerving. But hopefully you got something out of this. I don't have low expectations for the game being interesting at launch and having some cool mechanics and cool things in it. If it has the longevity, that really is up to Bungie, and we'll talk about that when the game comes out. Maybe once we get access to a beta or an alpha, we'll see kind of what the general game-to-game expectation is. And people can kind of settle their opinions on what they feel about the genre and the makeup of the game, and if it's too much PvP or PvE or something like that. Yeah, like I said, next week is going to be my full thoughts on new Marathon, what I'm expecting to see, what I've picked out of the trailers and interviews and any leaks or things like that, what I want to see out of the game, and anything I couldn't fit anywhere else when talking about Marathon. So if you want to see that, stick around. That's all for today, runners. And remember, in the heavens, they are waiting.